In 2011, a team of engineers working in Istanbul made a mistake. While reinforcing the foundations of the massive Topkapi Palace, a worker's pickaxe punched through a basement wall that wasn't on any blueprint. They expected to find solid earth. Instead, the wall crumbled away to reveal blackness, a void. A room sealed tight for 500 years. The air that rushed out smelled of ancient dust and decay. When they lowered their industrial lights into the hole, the beams cut through the dark and landed on the far stone wall. The engineers went silent. The wall was covered in scratches, not random marks, but desperate, deliberate carvings made with broken pottery and fingernails. Dozens of jagged crosses, and beneath them a message scratched in crude Latin, Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. They had not found a treasure room. They had found a tomb for the living. This is not a story about a war you read in history books. This is the story of the ghosts who lived beneath the Sultan's feet. To understand the terror of that room, you must go back to the year 1470. The world was bleeding. 17 years earlier, Constantinople, the greatest Christian city on earth, had fallen to Sultan Mehmed II. The shock wave of that event broke the spine of Europe. By 1470, the Ottoman war machine was not just marching, it was flowing like a river of steel through Greece and the Balkans, swallowing kingdoms whole. Their goal was not just conquest, it was erasure. They didn't just want the land, they wanted to wipe clean the memory of what had been there before. Churches were turned into stables. Bells were melted down into cannons, and those who refused to convert were turned into examples. Deep in the mountains of Thessaly, Greece, the convent of St. Catherine had stood for 2 centuries. 23 nuns lived there, women who had taken vows of silence and prayer, believing their isolation would protect them. They were wrong. When the Ottoman commander Hasan Pasha arrived at their gates, he didn't bring siege engines. He brought patience. He didn't order his men to attack. He ordered them to set up camp. He knew that fear was a better weapon than fire. He had the nuns herded into their own small stone chapel and barred the heavy wooden doors from the outside. Then the torture began. Not with blades, but with deprivation. No food, no water, just darkness. For 3 days, the soldiers outside feasted. They roasted lamb on open spits just yards from the chapel doors, letting the smell waft through the cracks to the starving women inside. They laughed. They sang songs of victory, making sure the women heard life going on without them. Inside, the air grew thick. The younger sisters began to weep, begging the abbess, Sister Elani, to surrender, to promise them anything just for a cup of water. But Elani refused. She knew Hasan Pasha didn't want their lives. He wanted their souls. He wanted them to trade their God for bread. As the thirst became unbearable, Elani began to sing, a low, cracked hymn in Latin. One by one, the other dry throats joined in. The sound was eerie, a choir of the dying rising from the stone prison. On the morning of the 4th day, the singing stopped. Hasan Pasha nodded to his men. They kicked open the chapel doors, expecting to find broken women begging for mercy. Instead, they found 23 skeletons standing upright, squinting against the sudden sunlight, holding each other up. They were weak, but they were unbroken. Hasan Pasha looked at them with cold amusement. Killing them now would be too easy. Instead, he smiled and said, "If you love your God so much, you can pray to him on the road to hell. He ordered them chained. They were roped together in a single file line, wrist to wrist, and forced to walk 7 days toward the coast under the scorching Greek sun. They had no shoes, only thin sandals that shredded on the sharp rocks of the mountain passes. This was the death march. The soldiers rode on horseback alongside them, using whips to keep the pace. They weren't marching them to freedom, they were marching them to the slave markets of the capital. The road was lined with Greek villages, but as the strange procession passed, soldiers guarding starving nuns, doors slammed shut. No one dared to offer a cup of water. Fear of the Turks was stronger than Christian charity. Sister Irene was the oldest, at 62. On the second day, her body simply gave out. She stumbled, dragging the two sisters chained to her down into the dust. The soldiers shouted, threatening them with the whip. Irene tried to stand, her knees shaking violently, but she collapsed again. She looked up at the abbess and simply closed her eyes. Hassan Pasha rode back, looked down at her and cut her rope. He didn't finish her off. He just signaled the column to move on. They left her there, alive but immobile in the dust, as the army marched around her like a river of steel, leaving her to vanish into history. By the time they reached the sea, 5 women were gone. The remaining 18 were loaded onto an Ottoman galley, a warship that smelled of old sweat, tar, and fear. They were thrown into the hold, chained near the oarsmen, who were themselves slaves. For 3 days across the Aegean Sea, they lay in the dark, listening to the whip crack against the backs of the rowers, moving closer and closer to the heart of the beast, Constantinople. They were brought to the Topkapi Palace. It was the most luxurious building on earth. A city within a city, filled with fountains of rose water, exotic peacocks in the gardens, floors of polished marble, and walls draped in silk. But the nuns never saw that world. They were taken to the service entrance, down slippery stone steps, into the damp, rat-infested labyrinth of tunnels beneath the palace. An Ottoman ledger from 1472 lists their arrival only as assets, domestic, disposal pending. Their names were erased, their pasts were deleted, they became ghosts. For years, while the Sultan slept in silk sheets 10 feet above their heads, these women lived in perpetual twilight. They scrubbed the filth from the palace drains. They hauled wood for the furnaces that heated water for the Sultan's baths. They were forbidden to speak. They were forbidden to pray. They existed only to serve the magnificent world above them, a world that didn't know they were there. But they did not break. They found a forgotten storage room behind a stack of rotting timber, a place the guards never checked. It became their sanctuary. They stole kitchen fat to make crude candles, so they wouldn't be in total darkness. They used a broken piece of pottery as a chalice for water, and every night, while the immense empire above them slept, 18 women gathered in that tiny, suffocating room and whispered the Mass in Latin. The Sultan thought he owned the world. He was wrong. He owned their bodies, but deep underground he could never touch their souls. The ledger entry from 1482, 12 years after their capture, is the last time they appear in any official record. It contains one single word next to their entry number: disposed. We don't know how it happened. Did a sickness sweep through the tunnels? Were they executed for being too old to work? We don't know where their bodies were thrown. The empire that consumed cultures finally consumed them. For 500 years, the world forgot they ever existed. Forgot them until that flashlight beam hit the wall in 2011. Archaeologists found 23 lines scratched into the stone, one for each sister who started the journey. But only 11 lines were finished. Beside the last cross, carved by a young nun named Magdalena, the scratches are deep and frantic, as if she knew her time was finally up, but she had to leave one last mark. The Ottoman Empire is gone. The sultans are dust. Their armies have faded away into myths. But deep in the dark, beneath the tourist crowds of modern Istanbul, those scratches remain. They are a permanent scar on the heart of the empire that tried to erase them. They endured.